Hello again, friends. Welcome into Gamecock Central Radio. It's Emerson Phillips joined by Wes Mitchell, and we're getting ready for the start of the 2016 football season. Wes, Will Muschamp had his first radio call-in show last night. The football team did not practice yesterday. Muschamp gave the team off. So today marks the start of what is officially game week for the first time here in 2016. South Carolina opens up 1 week from today at Vanderbilt on a Thursday night game, national TV game. We talked about it earlier this week here on Gamecock Central Radio. So game week is here, Wes.
Yeah, absolutely. It is here. It is upon us. I think it's always interesting to see how the different coaches sort of, attack the first game week as far as the schedule goes. And, you want to find a little bit of that balance between using your extra time that you have with it being week one, but also you don't want to spend all camp clearly on your week one opponent when you're not going to have that much time on the rest of your opponents. So, by starting, we're exactly 1 week away. Generally, you kind of have a day off in there at the, as you go from week one to week two or week two to week three. So, by actually practicing on the day, being Thursday to a Thursday game, and taking the day off before rather than after, they basically get 2 extra days of work on Vanderbilt than what they would have gotten on a regular week. But, I think coaches also sort of, they don't want the team to get too tired of doing all the same things and the same game planning, the same install for a week. So it makes a lot of sense. And of course, giving them the day off yesterday sort of marked the official beginning of the actual season, and basically, a situation where they were able to get their legs fresh going into Thursday's practice.
Right, so a physical preseason camp. Wes, all the indications from the players that have been asked about that during this preseason have said that there's been more hitting in preseason camp. There's been more contact, even though they haven't always tackled to the ground and this kind of thing. Several players have noted when asked that it's been a lot more physical this preseason than maybe it's been in the past few years.
Yeah, it has been physical, and I think that, Muschamp also, as now kind of a veteran coach, with some experience behind him, I think has also shown some restraint. He obviously gave them yesterday off, Wednesday off, and then, leading into the Saturday scrimmage, they actually had a couple of days where it was really just more walkthrough versus actual practices. And, he wanted them to be very, very fresh for that scrimmage last Saturday. And, I think that's something that as a coach you have to find that balance. You want to run a physical camp. There's a time when you sort of have to, for lack of a better way to say it, you kind of have to tear your guys down and then build them back up a little bit at points in this process. But then there becomes a time where you have to start building towards the season. You want your best health as the season begins, as far as finding a way to make sure that most of your team is healthy to start the year. And you want your guys to be fresh. You don't want them to still be tired from camp, with the season starting, because we all know it's sort of a grueling grind as far as the season goes. So I think Muschamp has had that balance. He's shown a lot of restraint. And, one thing about this group is that they absolutely harp on keeping teammates healthy, whereas, yes, they want to be physical. Yes, they want to hit. They want them to tackle the proper way as far as wrapping a guy up, but you don't bring him to the ground. As hard-nosed and as physical as these coaches want this defense to be, when you go to the open practices, one thing you always hear just as much as about anything else is you hear them yelling, keep him up, don't bring him to the ground. On just about every play when a guy's wrapping up, it's hold him up. So I think the idea of protecting your teammates and not getting, it's so easy for a leg to sort of get twisted or wrapped the wrong way in contact situations, that I think that's a big thing. And that's something that, especially a team that's lacking depth at a lot of positions, you got to take care of your teammates in practice, and they've done that.
Right, and you mentioned earlier this week here on Gamecock Central Radio that health is going to be very important for South Carolina football this year. The Gamecocks feel like they're pretty good in the first string on both sides of the football, we believe, at this early stage, as we get ready for the opener against Vanderbilt, but not as much depth as perhaps the Gamecocks would like. So it's going to be important for the number ones to stay healthy. So Muschamp and this new staff taking the necessary precautions throughout the preseason to make sure that everybody stays healthy. So that largely it has been a healthy preseason camp for the Gamecocks. And now we've got just 1 week until kickoff. Hard to believe the summer has really gone by quickly. And 1 week from tonight, South Carolina kicks it off at Vanderbilt to open the 2016 season. And this is Gamecock Central Radio with Emerson Phillips and Wes Mitchell. We invite you to download the Gamecock Central Radio app. It's available on the App Store and on Google Play. To subscribe to the podcast, search for Gamecock Central Radio. You'll find us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and other popular services, or you can just visit radio.GamecockCentral.com. 5 practices for the Gamecocks and then a walkthrough next Wednesday. And Wes, the team will travel to Nashville next week, Wednesday, to get ready for this Thursday night game. So Muschamp had his first radio call-in show of the new season last night, and he gave us a little bit of information about starters. He did not name a starting quarterback, as he indicated over the weekend that he would not do it this time, and he may not do that until game day, but he did give us a couple of starters on special teams. Tell us about it.
Yeah, that's right. A.J. Turner, the kickoff returner, which then you have Rashad Fenton, the punt returner, at least game one. That's the guys they're going to go with as the first teamers there. And, I think it makes sense. You saw what Rashad Fenton can do in the return game. It was actually a kickoff return last year at LSU where he, took it to the house. It was the first kickoff return for touchdown in like a million years at South Carolina. So, I think those guys have some speed, some quickness, some tackle breaking ability. Obviously, that's one of those things where I think Muschamp and this staff are sort of putting it into practice what they've preached, in that they said starters could play special teams, and you're going to put the best guys out there regardless of their other roles in the team. And you're talking about Rashad Fenton, probably the most important cog in South Carolina's defensive backfield right now, and A.J. Turner's their starting running back. So, both those guys very, very important to the team, but they're going to let them play special teams and go out there. And, I think in some ways, if you are a team that's got a bunch of unknowns, that has some question marks on offense, then, special teams is one way you can sort of get your playmakers in space. So I think putting some guys back there who have a real chance to sort of break a game open makes a lot of sense. And also, I think special teams is sort of a hidden advantage for South Carolina. I think that's something they're going to have to be good at. Vanderbilt was not very good on special teams last year. I believe they have a new special teams coordinator because of that. Gave up a ton of yards. They were last in the conference last year in basically return yardage allowed. So, this is a situation where I think throughout the year, South Carolina is probably going to have some advantages on special teams. They've got a great kicker, great punter. They're going to need special teams to perform if they're going to win some games.
Wes, Muschamp also on his call-in show last night gave us an injury update, and really there was nothing new there except for Kyle Markway, who is listed as 50-50 to play in the opener against Vanderbilt next week. We already reported here on Gamecock Central Radio earlier in the week that 3 players have been ruled out for the Vanderbilt game: running backs Rico Dowdle and Mon Denson, and linebacker Lorenz Bryant out for the Vandy game as well. And Muschamp said that the hamstring injury that he's got right now is not good, Wes.
Yeah, that's right. Bryant not really in a good spot right now. It's going to be a while before he gets back. Going to be a while before Rico Dowdle gets back. And then Markway 50-50. I think the thing with Markway is that, he's not been able to practice at all this preseason. So, I think it makes it difficult to get out there and play when that's the case. But this is a guy that, they have depth at tight end, but this is a guy that sort of brings something a little bit different to the table. He's good at the point of attack. He's a good blocker. He played on a bunch of their special teams units last year and was really, really successful there. So he's someone that's probably not, Markway I'm talking about, probably not one of the more heralded members of the team, but I think does a lot of things that just don't get noticed and does them very well. So, he's a guy that they certainly can get by without, but I think they would, clearly like to have him out there if possible.
All right, Wes, the first practice geared toward the Vanderbilt game takes place today. In fact, it was at 9 o'clock this morning. The Gamecocks hit the practice field to begin preparation in earnest exclusively for Vanderbilt. So talk about the game plan for Vandy and what South Carolina is going to need to do to win that football game.
Yeah, I think it starts and it ends where a lot of football games start and end, and that clearly is the turnover battle. I think if you're sort of looking at a game and you're trying to figure out how it's going to play out, and you don't really, there's a lot of unknowns on both sides, you have to start with that. If you win the turnover battle, you're going to be in a position to win a lot of games. And I think these are two teams that are probably going to be fairly evenly matched. This is probably going to be a fairly low-scoring, possibly ugly football game. I think week one, you're going to see some sloppiness. This is a new offensive scheme, a new defensive scheme, a new special team scheme, a new head coach, obviously. So there's probably going to be some sloppiness on South Carolina's side. They're going to need some big plays. But ultimately, it comes down to protecting the football. And then I think what I've said leading into the season for a while is that South Carolina's going to have to lean on this offensive line. That's where they have some experience on offense. That's where they have some guys that have played before. That's where they have some guys that are stepping in that I think they have very high expectations for. Corey Helms, who had to sit out last year, I think is a potentially big-time player. Donnell Stanley, DJ Park have had really, really good camps. And then Zach Bailey. This is a kid that I think has probably not gotten quite enough attention, maybe that he should this preseason, because I think there's an expectation where he could possibly be an all-SEC type guy and take that next step as a player. And then Mason Zandy is sort of the senior leader of that entire bunch and is a leader on the offensive side of the ball. So I think for them to be successful, not just game one, but into the season, as we go along, they're going to have to lean on this offensive line. They're going to have to give A.J. Turner room, and whichever quarterback Muschamp announces, they're going to have to give that guy time to obviously go through his progressions and deliver the football.
Wes, we know Muschamp has not announced a starting quarterback. Do you expect any starting position announcements between now and kickoff next Thursday night?
Yeah, I think that they'll sort of release that information as the week goes along. We'll get some media availability starting on Friday, and we'll sort of get a good idea. It's generally going to be a pretty good indication if a guy's working with the ones, this week in practice, that he's probably the starter. So a lot of these positions are sort of, even though they haven't announced starters, a lot of these other positions, we already have a pretty good idea of, who's going to be the guy. I think, A.J. Turner, they've pretty much said will start at running back. At wide receiver, I'd be absolutely shocked if it's not Deebo Samuel, Brian Edwards, and Jamari Smith in a 3-receiver set. At tight end, Hayden Hurst, I'd be shocked if he's not the starter. I think you go on the defensive side of the ball, DJ Smith and Chaz Elder are probably your starters at safety. I think at cornerback, there's still a little bit of Fenton's definitely going to be a starter. There's a little bit of a battle for if Jamarcus King can get into the starting lineup. At linebacker, Bryson Allen Williams is definitely a starter. I think TJ Holloman's probably the starter, although Jonathan Walton has done some really good things as well. And then, on the defensive line, there's probably some guys still battling it out for spots. I think Quay Lewis probably on the field at some position up front. He's played both defensive tackle and defensive end. Taylor Stallworth has really, really come along as of late. I think he's probably a starter at defensive tackle. You probably lean to Darius English at the buck, and the other starter will sort of depend on if Quay Lewis is inside or outside. If he's inside, Dante Sawyer's probably your starter at defensive end. If Quay is at defensive end, then I would say Kelsey Griffin is probably your other starter at defensive tackle. So for the most part, there are guys still fighting it out, but I think we already have a pretty decent idea of who the various starters are. And the big one, though, the one that everybody's waiting for, is obviously the quarterbacks. And Muschamp has basically said that ain't happening. He's going to wait. He said he's not even going to internally tell the quarterbacks, until possibly the day before the game, and possibly on game day. So I think that's, and I think, what, Emerson, I think it makes sense because, to his point, Vanderbilt basically has to prepare for all three guys. And there's film on Perry Orth, obviously, but there's no real film on Jake Bentley because he hasn't played. And then there's no film on Brandon McElwain at this level. And, I think South Carolina has so many internal unknowns as far as what they're going to be as a team. That may be one, and I think we talked about that previously. That may be one of your real true advantages to this game is that they might be unknowns to South Carolina, and they're definitely unknowns for Vanderbilt trying to scout South Carolina. They've got stuff offensively and defensively that they've not shown anyone for that very reason. Because Muschamp said even in the spring game they didn't run a single play offensively or defensively that was not a play that they hadn't already run either at Duke when Roper was there or at Florida. Basically, anything that was new was completely off the books, off the table for the spring game. So they, we've talked a lot about Muschamp being a detail-oriented coach. I think that's just another example of this. He's looking to gain every advantage in what I think most people think. I think it's going to be a close football game.
Yeah, I'll be surprised if it's not a 17-13 type of ball game. I think it's going to be a low-scoring game, but we'll find out next Thursday night. Wes, we've spent so much of the preseason, and especially the last week or two, talking about the running back battle. A.J. Turner, David Williams, Rod Talley's in the mix there as well. Quarterback battle with Perry Orth and Brandon McElwain and Jake Bentley. And then, the safety position has been a concern. And who's going to make plays at wide receiver? We know Deebo Samuel and Brian Edwards are out there along with Jamari Smith. And there's a handful of other kids who are going to get some playing time at wide receiver as well. But, Wes, the one player that we really haven't talked a lot about in the last week or two is Lorenzo Nunez, and I'm curious to know what kind of role you think he's going to have in this offense. We've heard he could play a Wildcat package or two at quarterback. We know that he's been moved to receiver. This kid was good in the open field last year, and he proved that he could make some plays, and I'm curious to know how South Carolina is going to get him to football.
Yeah, I think it's been one of those things where it has been a little bit difficult to sort of start to learn the nuances and intricacies of learning the wide receiver position, which I think is probably expected. So that's been a process for him. That's going to take some time. I don't think he's in the main sort of rotation at wide receiver right now, but I do think you sort of look and you say this is still a guy that can make plays and still a guy that can make something happen. I think at this point you maybe try to get just a few plays ready for him where you try to get him the football. A handful of plays either with him lining up at quarterback or him lining up outside at receiver. Maybe you put a few trick plays in for him, something like that. But I think it's just going to be one of those things where it's going to take time for him to sort of come along if receiver is going to be a true option for him. In the open practices, he just didn't look comfortable yet. Look comfortable. And I think that the expectation there is was probably set a little bit too high by the majority of the fan base and just expecting him just to naturally be able to pick everything up, because there's so many different things that go into route running and adjusting your routes on the fly and viewing coverages, not from a quarterback's standpoint, but from, outside at receiver. Not easy. So I think that's something that's going to take time.
Okay, Heath Klein is the afternoon show host on 107.5 The Game, the flagship radio station of the Gamecock Network. And Heath said a week or two ago that he thinks Lorenzo Nunez might hold the key to the season for the Gamecock offense. If he gives the Gamecocks a legitimate third receiver option, or if he can get involved in any positive way to give the Gamecocks some production, be it at Wildcat quarterback or maybe even as part of the running game, if he can give the Gamecocks anything, particularly at wide receiver, he could hold the key to success for Gamecock offense this season. So another variable that we'll have to consider as we continue to count down the days to kickoff here on Gamecock Central Radio. Right now, to count down to 7 days, 1 week from today, we'll get it underway. South Carolina at Vanderbilt, again, an 8 o'clock kickoff in a national TV ball game. Wes Mitchell and I will return here on Gamecock Central Radio to talk more about it over the course of the next week. Thanks very much, Wes.
Thanks, man. We'll talk to you soon.
All right, he's Wes Mitchell, and I'm Emerson Phillips, and this is Gamecock Central Radio. Thanks for joining us.